In the fall of 1880, in Custer County, Nebraska, my mother took up work that made no sense to anyone, including me. I was 10. Every evening after chores, she sat down at a plank laid across 2 chairs on the stoop, pulled a hank of coarse slough hay from the pile, and twisted it into a stick. Not braiding, the way girls braid rushes, not bundling, the way men bundle kindling. Twisting, hard, the way you wring water out of a shirt, until the hay kinked back on itself. And then she doubled it, tucked the ends under, and laid it in a bushel basket like it was something worth keeping. We were a widow's place by then, and a widow's daylight was the only money we had. Every hour at that plank was an hour not spent on the corn, the cow, or the 100 other things a homestead demands when the man of it is gone. And the neighbors could run that arithmetic as fast as I could. Worse, she had traded our fat shote to my Uncle August for 3 stacks of rank slough hay that no horse would touch, and had it hauled right into the yard, where the whole road to town could see it standing and wonder what had come over Eva Keller. She knew what it looked like. She twisted anyway, evening after evening, filling basket after basket with grass sticks while the light lasted, and I sat on the step with my chin in my hands and prayed nobody would ride by while she was at it. By Christmas, the last coal train of that winter would roll through our town, and nobody aboard it would know it was the last. By the middle of February, the same women who laughed behind their gloves would be sitting in our kitchen with raw fingers, learning what my mother's hands already knew. But that fall, I understood none of it. That fall, I was only ashamed. Our town was called Alder, after trees that were not there. That was the whole story of our county and wood, told in one word, painted on a depot sign. What burning we did came in on the railroad, in coal cars, to T.C. Marsh's shed beside the tracks, and Marsh weighed it out at $4 a ton, with the air of a man doing the county a kindness it could never fully repay. The talk about my mother started at Marsh's scale, the way most talk in that county did. Marsh had heard of grass widows, he told the scale crowd, but Custer County had gone the world one better. Custer County had itself a straw widow. It was a good joke by shed standards. It walked to the church steps by Sunday, rode out along the section lines by Tuesday, and came through the school door by Monday week, where it found me, the way those things always find the children first. Uncle August's verdict was shorter, and it traveled just as far, because it sounded like sense. Coal is $4 at the shed, he said. The shote she gave me was worth $6. She paid money to make herself work. He was not being cruel. He was doing arithmetic out loud at the scale, and there was not a man standing there who could fault a number in it. At school, the joke wore my name. At recess, the big boys sat in a row on the woodpile, working their fists in the air, twisting nothing, solemn as deacons, until the little ones choked laughing, and one noon I came home with a split lip I would not explain and my mother did not ask about. She looked at it, and at me, and set a second plank across 2 nail kegs beside her own. If they are going to charge you for the work, she meant, you had better know the work. I twisted my first crooked stick that evening. I did not thank her for it for 30 years. Mother went to town twice that fall. She heard the name. A town that size keeps nothing to itself, least of all its wit. She bought salt, thread, and a paper of needles, spoke her thank yous plainly, and rode home with her back straight as a wagon standard, and that evening the basket on the stoop filled the same as the evening before. And here and there, in the quiet after the laughing, a man would recollect that Eva Keller had never in anybody's memory done 1 hour of foolish work in her life, and would catch himself wondering, privately, what it was she could see coming down those rails that he could not. The place she was twisting for had been half quiet since June. My father, Will Keller, drowned at the Loop crossing that month, bringing home a wagon load of pine for the floor he had promised her since the year they proved up. The lumber washed ashore a mile down. He did not, for 3 days. I remember the pine stacked in the barn all that summer with the river stain still on it, and nobody in that family able to look at it straight. His carpenter's square hung on its nail on the soddy wall all fall. The floor stayed dirt, swept so hard and so often that it shone like gray slate. Every Sunday night, last thing, she wound his watch, and there was not a soul in that house who needed the time. The women at church said a widow with 1 boy and 80 acres of tableland ought to sell out and go back to her people in Saline County. Her people were the reason she stayed, the kind of woman who would not. Her mother had come out of Bohemia, from a village on flat black land where every stick of standing timber belonged to the great house, and the poor burned what the field gave them, or went cold. Straw twisted tight, grass wrung hard as rope. Her mother had done it as a girl until her hands could do it in the dark and in her sleep, and she had passed down one saying about it, which my mother said to me exactly once, that October, at the plank, without looking up from her hands. Wood warms the rich, grass warms the willing. It sounded like a poor woman's proverb, the kind that hangs in a family like wood smoke. It was not a proverb. It was a trade, with rules and a right way and a wrong way, carried across an ocean in a pair of hands. And that fall, the trade had come out of its long sleep, because my mother had looked around her at a county with no trees, 1 railroad, 1 coal shed, and a bad-signed autumn, and had drawn her own conclusions about arithmetic. October tested her first. 3 days of cold rain came down off the sandhills, and when the sky cleared, the top of the east stack had drunk water like a sponge, and a basket of finished sticks left out on the stoop had gone black and sour, near 200 of them, a week of her evenings spoiled in 1 wet night. August came by for his plow while she was carrying the ruined basket to the hog lot, and he had the decency to say nothing, and the satisfaction not to need to. She spent the next week answering the rain. She combed the stack tops and thatched them steep and tight, the way stacks were roofed in her mother's country, so the water would run off like it runs off a mallard's back. She set the ricks up on old wagon bunks, a hand's width clear of the ground damp. And the twisting moved indoors for good, to the plank set up by the stove, where it would live from then until spring. The next rain came through in early November and slid off that thatch without wetting a straw beneath it. August hauled past the yard the day after and looked a long time at those combed golden stack tops, shining and dry in a wet gray country. He did not mention it to her or to anybody. Neither did she. He came to our woodpile in late November and made his whole case, and I want it set down fair because my uncle was no fool and no villain. He had helped fight the fire that took the Novak place west of town in '66, a flue fire in January, children carried out barefoot into the snow, and he had helped dig the graves behind it, too. Hay fire is flash fire, he said. A stove full of grass is gone in 10 minutes, and half of it goes up the pipe still burning. The soot builds fast and dirty, and soot is what caught at the Novaks. A stove that has to be fed every quarter hour, day and night, Christmas to March, will wear down a grown man, let alone a woman and a half-grown boy. And a mile east of us stood a shed full of coal, 2 trains a week behind it, and the railroad, he said, laying his mitten on the top rail. The railroad is here to stay. Every word of it came out of calluses and a burned house, not out of meanness, and half the county would have signed it like a petition. Mother heard him to the end, with the twist plank across her knees and her hands never stopping. Then she looked off east, down the line of the rails where they ran off the edge of the world toward the coal fields, and gave him 6 words for his whole speech. Coal rides the rails, winter doesn't. August rode home unconvinced, but I stood at the corner of the soddy and watched him go, and I will tell you what I noticed. He rode home slower than he came. His prophecy kept its appointment all the same. A still morning in early December, the stovepipe began to growl, low, like a dog warning behind a door, and a smell of burning tar dropped into the room. Flue fire. The soot of 6 weeks of hay smoke had caught inside the pipe, exactly as my uncle had promised at the woodpile that it would. She did not run and she did not cry out. She slammed the damper shut to starve it, threw a double handful of salt through the stove door, and then stood with her palm flat against the warming pipe, like a doctor taking a fever, while I stood in the corner, hugging the water pail, with my heart going like a snared rabbit. The growl climbed, held, and died. The pipe ticked as it cooled. The whole of it was over inside 10 minutes, and it never happened again in that house, because she never once let it. Every Saturday, from that morning to spring thaw, the pipe came down and was dragged through with a chain and a feed sack until it rang like a church bell. The twisting changed, too. She wrung the sticks tighter, hard as oak knots, because a tight twist burns slow and quiet, and a loose one burns like a newspaper and throws its sparks at the flue. A spark pail of water took up its post on the stove shelf and stood that post until April. The flue fire cost her every Saturday of that winter. It also made ours the safest stove on that road, coal or no coal, and the sticks that came off the plank afterward were better fuel than the ones that came before. My uncle's warning had come true inside our own stovepipe, and the proving of it had improved the very thing it was meant to bury. On the shelf above the flour barrel stood a butter crock half full of seed corn, and that crock was the bookkeeping of the whole winter. Every time 100 finished sticks went out to the rick, 1 kernel of corn went into the crock. She counted them out at night by lamplight, slow, the way other households read scripture, and the kernels climbed all through the fall. Nobody counted with her. Marsh got word of the crock, because Marsh got word of everything that happened in that county, and he held forth on it at the scale. Counting corn like a banker counts paper money, he said, and the scale crowd gave that the laugh it was priced at. Out on the flats, meanwhile, the country was keeping books of its own. The geese went over early that year, and high, in long, hurried strings. The corn came out of its husks, wrapped thick as mittens. The badgers dug deep, and the old men who noticed such things had quit saying anything at all about the winter coming, which in that country was the loudest thing an old man could say. The second week of December, she stopped dead in the lean-to doorway, with her chin lifted like a doe at a fence line, and smelled something I could not smell at all. "Sweet," she said. "Warm, sweet." She went into the rick wall with both arms, tearing out sticks that looked to me exactly like every stick around them, until 2 feet deep, at the heart of the pile, her hand came out steaming in the cold air. A batch, twisted from the wet October hay, had gone to the rick with damp hearts, and packed in close with 100 neighbors, they had commenced to heat. Hay heat, left alone until January, becomes hay fire. It has burned down barns whose owners never struck a match in them. We pulled a third of that rick apart in the dooryard cold, she and I, and strung the suspect sticks out on the clothesline like a wash day, where the freeze and the wind could dry their hearts honest. The road got a fresh laugh out of that, grass sticks pinned out on a line in December, and I felt every wagon that slowed. I said out loud what the road was thinking. "They look the same as all the others," I said. "Damp hay holds grudges," she said, and went on pulling. By the third week of December, the work stood done, or as done as that work ever stands. The lean-to was racked to the rafters. Half the barn bay was racked solid behind it. Better than 4,000 sticks stood in walls like cordwood, gold-gray and hard as corn cobs, and our yard looked like a woodlot grown up overnight in a county that had never owned one. She tied off the last rick cord in a fine, dry snow, hung the twist hook on its nail by the door, and went in to start supper as if nothing in the yard were strange. Sleds slowed in the road all that week. Some turned around and came back past for a second look. I ought to say here what the baskets cost, because the road never saw it. Her hands that winter were a field hand's hands in August, rope burned across both palms, split at the thumb creases, and every night she sat greasing them by the lamp with mutton tallow and wrapping the worst fingers in strips of flour sack for morning. She never once called it hard in my hearing. She called it Tuesday. Marsh saved his best line for a full shed on the Saturday before Christmas. "The Straw Widow," he announced, "has put up kindling enough to burn Custer County twice, and there is not a stove in Nebraska worth the ash it would leave." It was a good line, his best of the season. It went home in a dozen wagons, was repeated over a dozen suppers, and came through the school door on Monday morning, where it found me, as every one of them found me, sooner or later, all that fall. The last coal train of that winter rolled through Alder 3 days before Christmas. It did not whistle any different. It did not sit any lower on its springs. Nobody on it, and nobody watching it pass, knew what it was. Ott Pierce came out to our place between Christmas and New Year's. Pierce had freighted the overland trails for 30 years before the rails came and put him out. A man weathered down to leather, silence, and judgment, and he did not ask leave to walk the ricks. He walked them like a buyer. He pulled one stick out of the wall, hefted it in one hand, tried it over his knee with both, and grunted when it only bent. He looked down the racked bay the way a man looks into a full corn crib in a bad year. Then he turned and asked my mother the one question he had ridden 4 miles to ask. How many to a day and a night? 60, 70 when it blows. Pierce stood a while in the lean-to doorway, doing sums of his own, the kind of sums that had carried him alive across 30 winters of open country, with nothing between him and the weather but judgment. Then he put the stick back in the wall where he had taken it from, which I have thought about all my life, and rode to town and told the depot agent in front of witnesses to wire down the line for coal cars early, because the signs were bad and the cut west of town was a proven snow trap 15 winters running. The agent laughed at him. Men had cause to remember, afterward, that Ott Pierce had not laughed once the whole day. The winter called its debt in the first week of January. A blizzard filled the west cut flush to the prairie, and 40 men with scoops dug the line out in 3 days. The second blizzard filled it again in one night, and buried the spoil banks they had thrown up besides. The third storm made the digging into a joke that nobody in Alder told. The trains stopped. They did not run again for 9 weeks. Marsh's shed weighed out the last of its coal on the 20th of January, at prices men were still angry about when I was grown. After the coal went, he sold cobs. After the cobs, the shed sold nothing but opinions, and the town quit buying those free of charge. Between the storms, it stood 25 below for days on a stretch, a cold that snapped nails in the siding and made the sod houses groan like ships. And every stove in that county commenced to eat whatever its family could carry to it. What the stopped trains meant, a town learns a little at a time. The mail quit, the sugar went, then the kerosene, and men took to hauling green cottonwood 12 miles up out of the river canyons through drifts that swallowed the teams to the hames. 2 days for a load that hissed and sulked and gave half heat. The county had run on the whistle of that train, the way a body runs on a heartbeat, and the plains had reached out one January and put 2 fingers on the artery. The winter had come to take the county's fuel inventory. It counted everything, and it skipped no one. At my Uncle August's frame house, 4 miles up the table, the arithmetic he had recited at our woodpile came apart 1 row at a time. His cottonwood went first, green and sulky, hissing half its heat straight up the pipe. Then he burned corn, good ear corn, 9 cents a bushel that fall, and not worth the hauling to sell. And my Aunt Lena said, years after, that the smell of a year's work roasting in the firebox was a smell she never in her life got out of that kitchen. Then the board fence went, rail by rail, sawed short in the yard by lantern light. Then the partition out of the granary, and by the 1st of February, my uncle stood in the granary door doing long division over the seed corn sacks, which is a sum a farmer does 1 winter in his life and never once forgets. The frost ferns grew an inch thick on Lena's east wall, on paper she had ordered out of the catalog. The children wore their coats to supper and their caps to bed. The water pail froze solid 6 feet from a stove that was burning fence. 4 miles down the table, in a sod house with a dirt floor, the same nights went another way entirely. The walls my father had cut out of the prairie held the day's warmth the way a cellar holds October. The stove ticked steady on twisted grass, 1 stick every quarter hour, 60 sticks racked in the wood box by dark like a little cordwood city. And after supper, the plank came out and we twisted tomorrows while we burned todays. My hands learned the work that winter, learned it so deep that they remember it still, 60 years on mornings when they have half forgotten how to make a fist. The kettle mumbled. Bread rose under a cloth on the shelf behind the stove because the room was warm enough, all winter, to raise bread. And my mother hummed at the plank, the way she only ever hummed when snow was falling. One song, always the same song, and to this day I cannot tell you its name. On the last night of January, she dropped the 41st kernel into the crock. 4 miles apart, 2 houses sat out the same black cold, one burning its fences and its future, one burning its slough grass, and a whole education lying in the snow between them. Here is what the shed crowd had missed, and it is simple enough to say across any stove in the country. Grass is wood. It is the same sunlight, put up loose instead of tight. Fire is a greedy eater, and it takes loose fuel all at once, and tight fuel a little at a time. And that is the whole difference between a match and a log. A hay twist is nothing in this world but a poor man's log. Grass with the air wrung out of it until the fire is made to wait its turn. Wrung hard and cured dry, pound for pound, slough grass gives near the heat of soft cottonwood, and the sloughs grew it by the ton, every summer, free of freight and free of marsh, to any pair of hands willing to make the 100,000 turns of the wrist that a winter costs. And that is the honest bill of it, too, so let it be said plain. The twists asked hands, hours, dry storage, and a chain through the pipe every Saturday, and they were never once as good as coal. Nobody in our house ever claimed they were. Coal was better fuel. Grass was present fuel. And in the winter the train stopped. Present was the only kind of fuel there was. My Uncle August came down the 2nd week of February, behind a team pushing snow to their briskets, and he admitted afterward, to his credit, why he had come. He had come to see whether his brother's widow and his brother's son were alive, and to learn whether there was anything left in the county worth borrowing. He had not laid eyes on the place since before Christmas. He stopped the team in the yard and sat looking at the rick walls standing full and square and golden in the lean-to. And then he did a thing I have never forgotten. He took off one mitten before he knocked, and at 20 below, a man does that in front of something he respects. The kitchen took him in like June. Bread on the shelf, the wood box racked like a bank vault, and on the shelf above the flour barrel, the butter crock, with 41 kernels of seed corn in it, and he knew the bookkeeping by then, the whole county knew it. So he stood in the middle of our floor and worked the sum out loud, slow, the way a sum gets worked when it is busy changing a man's mind. 100 sticks to the kernel. 4,100 sticks made. 60 a day, 70 when it blew. He had burned his fence and the wall out of his own granary, and he was 2 days cold from his seed corn. My mother had 2 months still standing dry in the lean-to, and the plank still set up by the stove. He walked over and laid his bare palm flat against the stovepipe, which was warm and clean and quiet. And then my Uncle August, who had done the arithmetic out loud at Marcia's scale in front of the county, said the 3 words I had been waiting all winter for somebody to say. I was wrong. She never answered it, not in words. She set the twist plank across his knees, laid a hank of slough hay in his hands, and sat down across from him with her own. By lamplight that evening, my uncle made his first stick, crooked as a dog's leg, and then a straighter one, and then a fair one. He drove home in the dark with 2 sled loads of finished sticks under his knees, and his boys were back with the empty sled by Saturday morning. And in all of it, nobody in our kitchen said one word about shoats or arithmetic or straw widows. What happened after that had a name in our county for years. Twisting bees. Women in our kitchen, 2 afternoons a week, February into March, mittens off, learning the ring and the double and the tuck, while their hands cracked and bled, the way every pair of learning hands cracked, and my mother walking the plank line like a quiet foreman. The school stove burned twisted hay to the end of the term. Keller sticks, people called them, and the other name, the shed name, died the way such names die, quietly, of plain disuse. The trains came back the second week of March, 9 weeks gone. Marsh sold coal again by summer, and to the end of his life he never said straw widow again. He did, it was noticed, take to stocking twist hooks on the shelf by the stove polish, and to selling a good number of them every fall, and to saying rather less at the scale on all subjects generally. And when the slough hay came ripe that next August, my Uncle August put up 3 tall ricks of it by his own back door, combed and thatched steep, up off the ground on wagon bunks, and never explained them to one living soul. My mother wintered on that place 18 more years. The carpenter's square hung on its nail. The watch was wound on Sundays. The pine got laid down at last, the second spring, a floor under her feet, 40 years after the promise of one. And it was my uncle who laid it, over her objections and under her coffee. And that was the only argument I ever knew any man to win against her. The song she hummed when it snowed never did get a name, and I have quit asking the dead to tell me. I have had 60 years now to turn that winter over, and it always comes out the same. The county was never short of fuel that year. It was short of willingness, and it had gotten the two confused, because the fuel it trusted came in on cars, and the fuel it was standing on came up in grass. Her mother said it first, across an ocean, in a village none of us will ever see. My mother proved it in one Nebraska winter, at a plank by a stove, with rope-burned hands. And I will leave it with you the way it was left with me. Wood warms the rich. Grass warms the willing. Now, the Kellers are ours. You will not find Eva Keller in any Custer County record, and the town of Alder is invented. But here is what is true. The winter of 1880 and 81 was real, and it was the worst railroad winter the plains ever saw. Trains across Dakota Territory, Minnesota, and stretches of Nebraska stood blocked for weeks, and in places for months, and towns at the end of the line ran clean out of coal. Families really did twist slough hay into sticks and feed their stoves with them, from Christmas to spring, hour after hour, day after day. And the settler memoirs, including the famous ones, describe hands that cracked and bled from the work. Corn really was burned for fuel in the years it was cheap. The treeless counties really did call their grass and chip fuel prairie coal. And the tight twist, the doubling, the tucked ends, all of it came west in the hands of people who had burned straw on treeless land for generations before they ever saw Nebraska. The people are imagined. The knowledge is not.